Hey everybody, today instead of a CRT repair we're actually going to be doing a console mod. We're going to be installing an XStation, which is a ODE, which stands for optical drive emulator, and basically what it does is it replaces the disk drive in a PlayStation 1 with a micro SD reader. And basically the advantage of that is you don't have to deal with your physical disk collection anymore. You don't have to worry about your laser dying or your games getting scratched up by a bad laser. And the load times are a little bit better, so there's a lot of advantages to going with an ODE. And we're going to be installing it to this console, which is a SCPH-1001 revision, which is the first revision of the console. And so there are, within each case revision, there are several board revisions for the motherboard inside. So I've already verified that this board is going to work, but you're going to want to verify that ideally before you buy a PlayStation, or if you've already got one, you're going to want to verify what you have inside before buying the kit, because it does not work with every PlayStation, and I would argue that it does not work with any of the most common models that you'll find out there. Most of the models I find when I'm searching for used PlayStation 1s are the 7000 series or the 9000 series, and neither of those work. It's possible that the early 7000 series may get compatibility at a later date, but as of right now it doesn't work. So make sure you know what you're buying before you jump into this. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the screws from the case. Just going to use a P2 Phillips for that. And so if you're looking to verify what version of the PS1 you have, you're going to want to follow along with me through this process with your own PlayStation to open it up and see what version the board inside is. Okay, so once you've taken out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws off the bottom, you can flip the console over. And actually the other thing you're going to want to do before you even bother taking the PlayStation apart is you're going to want to make sure that it can read games. I know it seems a little counterintuitive to be replacing the optical drive, but having to still make sure that that optical drive can read games. The reason this is important is because there are other parts on the PlayStation 1 motherboard that can fail when the console doesn't read discs anymore. It's not only a possibility that maybe the laser is bad. There are actual chips on the motherboard that can go bad that are responsible for reading the data that comes in from the drive. And if those chips have failed, then it doesn't matter if you install an XStation, the motherboard's still not going to be able to interpret that game data that comes in from the emulated drive. So I actually made the mistake of buying a console for cheap off eBay that didn't read discs, thinking it was an easy way to get a cheap console, and ended up screwing myself over because the chip had actually failed on the board. Usually the telltale sign of a failed chip is when the game tries to boot, but then you get stuck on the Sony logo that comes up before the game boots. So like the black PlayStation logo will usually look corrupted or have missing text, or you'll just get stuck somehow on that screen. That usually means that the chip has failed. So just be careful, make sure you buy a working console if you're gonna go to the trouble of installing an expensive ODE like this into it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take out the drive power cable, and we're going to take out the drive data cable, which is a latched connection. So you're just going to want to grab the edges with your fingernail and pop out both latches. And once you've done both of those things, you can take the drive completely out, and we're just going to set this off to the side. Now we're going to disconnect the power cable from the motherboard. And then we're going to go around and remove several screws. They're all marked with arrows. These are all the screws that need to be removed in order to lift off this metal shield and actually verify what version of PlayStation 1 motherboard you have. Some of the screws are short like this and the rest are long. That's the only differentiation. So the short screws are going to go here. Sorry, my finger's in the way. Here, here, and here. There's 3 of them. Do not put a long screw into a short screw hole because it will still thread and you'll think that the screw is going in fine, and then you'll hear a cracking noise, and that's the sound of the end of the long screw driving into the top of the RAM chips on the motherboard because you used a long screw in a short screw hole. Kind of a bad design by Sony, but then again, you know, they're not expecting these to be user serviceable. They're supposed to be serviced by Sony, so you know, it's your own fault if you don't put it together correctly. So once you've taken out these screws on the bottom half, you'll notice that this shield comes right off for the memory card and controller slots, and then it just lifts right out, and it connects via a ribbon cable that can just be pulled straight up and out. So we're going to take that off, and then we're going to keep going across the board here, taking out more screws. I think that's all of them. So most PS1 motherboards, unless they've been serviced by someone other than Sony who may have ripped this, there's a copper tape that connects the bottom metal shielding to the top metal shielding, so it's going to hinge on that tape, so you just want to open it like a book. Now you can see what version of board you have by looking right here. This is a PU-8, and here is the full revision number, or rather the part number of the board. The last 2 digits of the part number are the revision number. This is revision 23, which is good. That is a late model PU-8 board, which if you look at the XStation installation guide, late motherboards end in either 21, 22, 23, or 41. So this one's good to go. The early PU-8 boards have the part number in a different location entirely, but you should be able to find it, you know, somewhere etched onto the board. So we're going to take the board out of the case, which there's 2 more screws that got exposed from taking that shielding off. They are located on the parallel port. Of course, only the 1000 series PlayStations have a parallel port, so if you're working on a 5000 series PlayStation, you probably don't have those screws. So now we've got the board out, we can go ahead and close this back up like a book and set it aside for now. Put that there. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping here. Put these in a safe place. Now, you're definitely going to want to follow along with the XStation installation guide, but just to give you an overview, this is the chip that we're going to be lifting pins off of. It is located directly behind the serial port, straight down. And then on the other side of the board is where we're going to be attaching the QSB, or the quick solder board. It's going to go in this region. Before we can place the QSB, there's a few resistors that have to be removed from the board in this area and in this area, and also near the CPU oscillator, which I think is on the front of the board. Yeah, right in this area. So we're going to do that first. Okay. Let me get my soldering iron hooked up here. So to lift the pins, it's a very they're a very fine pitch. They're not, obviously they're not as fine pitch as the GPU is, but they're still pretty close together. They're so close together that these fine tip angled tweezers I have were not thin enough to fit in between the pins. So what I do personally is I have a screwdriver set that has a small enough flathead to be used for, you know, jewelry or a watch repair. It's literally like a needle tip. I don't know if I can get the camera to focus on it or not. Let's try tapping the screen here. Come on. No, it doesn't want to focus on it. It's literally, it's like a little needle. So we're going to use that to get leverage behind the pins. And we're going to use a little bit of flux and a clean solder tip to heat up the pin. It's very important that your solder tip is clean and not have any solder on it, because that solder will transfer directly onto the pins and you could end up breaching a pin by accident, and you won't be happy at having to fix that. It's very annoying unbridging IC pins. So I use a little magnifying glass just to help, but the pros like Voltar and everybody use digital microscopes, and that is definitely the way to go if you can afford one. But they're a couple $100 minimum. So alright, so get my solder tip clean here. There we go. You can hopefully see it. The camera really doesn't want to focus on jack shit today, does it? It just wants to focus on the desk and nothing else. So the flux that I use is Chipquick SMD 291 no clean tack flux. I like this because it comes with a needle tip, and it's not a alcohol based flux, so it won't run everywhere and end up getting on pins that I'm not trying to heat up. You know, don't get me wrong, there's great applications for both alcohol-based flux and tacky, sticky flux. In this specific case, I prefer some sticky, tacky flux. So we're going to go ahead and put some flux on the 4 pins that we're lifting, which on the right side of the CXD chip, we're lifting the 2nd pin from the top and the 4th pin from the bottom. So I'm going to get in there with this and put a little bit, just a little, like rice, not even a rice size, like smaller than a rice size, just the little bit. It doesn't take much. Then we're going to count 4 up from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on the top row, at least the way I'm looking at it, it's the top row, it's pin 69 and 66, but it's the 2nd from the right and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th from the right. So 2nd from the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the right. The 5th pin from the right has a trace going right up to a test point pad, so that's a good way to mark it. It's this little gold ring. The 2nd pad has that as well. So now that we've got the flux on there, we're going to get our screwdriver. I'm going to start at the bottom of the right side, and that is the 4th pin. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I always count over and over and over again just to make sure that I'm counting to the right number of pin, because you don't want to be lifting the wrong pin. That would really be a bad time for you. And it doesn't take much at all to get the pins to lift when there's some leverage behind them, so it really only took a second of me applying heat to get the pin to lift. Now I'm just playing with the angle on it to try and get it straight and lifted so that there is no chance of it touching anything it's not supposed to. That one's done. So let's move on to the next one, which is the 2nd from the top. This one is a little more annoying of an angle because there's a big capacitor in the way of your soldering iron, but it's not too bad. Got it. And obviously we're trying to be non-destructive here, even though I doubt anyone's going to be converting an XStation console back to a regular console, but you know, just in case you screw something up or you lift the wrong pin, you want to make sure you can put it back, so don't break off any pins. Okay, so now we're moving to the top row. We're doing the 2nd from the right. I get the screwdriver all set up in a line before I get the soldering iron anywhere near the pin. And the second I see the pin lift, I take the soldering iron off. so that nothing else has time to heat up. And you don't want to force the pin to come up. If it's not lifting, that means it's still attached to the pad, and you want to just give it, bring the iron back in, give it a little more heat, and try again, because if you apply any force to the pins, you'll rip off the trace from the board, which, you know, isn't the end of the world, but you may end up ripping off more of a trace than just the pin you're trying to lift, and then you do have a problem. So now we're lifting the 5th pin from the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Coming in with that soldering iron. I should not have drank coffee before this because my hand is shaking. That's not normally a problem for me, but we're still managing. Alright, so I've got these pins all nice and lifted, so now what I'm going to do, which is a little bit difficult right now because I have my camera recording for video, but normally I would use the camera to check my pins, but maybe we can do it using our video here. Let me turn on flash and let's zoom in. This is a little bit hard to see for me. So those look good to me. There might be a bridge there on the pads. I gotta go in and double check off camera because this is a little bit of a weird angle for me. That one looks fine. That one looks fine. So yeah, I'm just gonna double check over here off camera. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I checked those pins, zoomed on with the camera, and they look fine. So the next thing we're going to do is remove a resistor and a capacitor, or rather it's a filtering capacitor. They are right next to the CPU oscillator, which is this chip right here. So we're going to be removing that filtering capacitor and that resistor. And the way that you remove these is just imagine my screwdriver is a soldering iron. You're going to put some solder on the iron. You're going to tap it to both ends of the resistor so you get both of them tinned. And then you're going to hold the iron up against the side of the resistor so that both sides of it get heated up simultaneously, and then you'll start to see it slide. And then you just flick it off, you know, and it'll stick to the tip of the iron and come clean off the board. And you want to do the same thing for this filtering capacitor, and you want to mind not to get any solder on the GPU pins in the vicinity near the filtering capacitor, and also you want to make sure you don't take off any additional resistors or capacitors that aren't supposed to come off. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to narrate the rest of this because I had to throw out the audio that I had on the phone camera, but right here I'm just taking off that resistor that's right next to the CPU oscillator, and it just came right off onto the tip of the soldering iron. So we're gonna throw that away and then move on to the filtering capacitor that's right above the oscillator. So here we're removing that filtering capacitor, and what I'm doing is I'm tinning the sides of the capacitor a little bit with the solder and touching the iron to either end, and then I'm putting the iron parallel to the capacitor and trying to get it to lift. It needed a little bit more solder, and then it lifted off, but it just didn't want to stick to the iron, so I had to be a little more persistent, but it came right off. And I'm just inspecting it here to make sure there's no bridging, and as you can see right there, as soon as the camera focuses, they are not bridged, and it looks nice and clean where I took those two items off the board. So now we're going to move on to the group of 3 resistors on the back of the board. So here is a close-up look at those 3 resistors we're going to be taking off. Right there, they're all in a row, nice and easy to find. 1, 2, 3. So we're going to take those off the exact same way. I like to start with the leftmost one and make my way over one at a time, but you know, you can do it however you want to do it. And I'm using the exact same method I used on the other resistors.
So there's those 3 resistor spots. You can see the resistors are gone and all the pads are clean and now bridged. So now we're good to move on to the next area, which is actually the QSB installation. So we're going to take that out of the box here. You get some free stickers. That blue cable in there is your flex cable for connecting the XStation to the QSB. So we're going to set that aside, and then you'll notice you get 2 QSB boards with the XStation. One is for the 1000 series PlayStation, and the other is for the 5000 series. So you'll only end up using one of them. Make sure you use the right one for your console, and you can either toss the other one away, or you can let your installer keep it, which I'm sure they will appreciate because these things cost like 30 bucks, and it's always nice to have backups in case the QSB is bad or the installation doesn't go well. So here I am placing the 1000 series QSB on the back of the board. You'll notice there's like a little resistor that is cut out in the middle of the QSB, so that's a good way to initially align the QSB to the board layout. And then what I'm going to be doing now for the next minute or two is staring at all of the different pads and contact points for the QSB and making sure they're lined up as perfectly as I can get them. And then once I like the way that everything looks, I'm going to use some Kapton tape to tape it in place just to keep it from sliding around while I solder down a few of the pads. Then I'm coming in here with the chip quick, and I'm going to shoot every single pad with just teeny little bit of flux just to help promote good heat transfer and make sure that we get contact with all these pads, especially the pad at the top of the QSB that's actually a through hole pad that has to go down through to a hole below it. That one you definitely want to make sure you get some flux in there, or it's not going to make good contact. And here's my wife. I think she was trying to adjust the camera for me because she noticed that it was staring at my shoulder instead of at the board that I was working on. So she tried her best here to help me out. I need a cameraman, clearly. Alright, so here's the part where we actually soldered the QSB to the PlayStation board. There's really not much to this part as long as you did your flux nicely and you're using good quality solder and a good iron. It only takes like 1 to 2 seconds of heat contact per pad to get it to form a nice solder connection. The hole that I was referring to before at the top of the QSB, that's a through hole pad. That one I usually give a little bit longer on heat, maybe like 3 to 4 seconds, just to really make sure that the solder flows all the way down to the pad below it. But otherwise, you just want to make sure that you actually get every single pad, and you want to triple check that you've soldered every single pad, because it's very easy to miss them, especially when they're covered in flux residue. They don't shine anymore, and so it's actually easy to forget 1 or 2 pads, you know, as you're going here, and then later on you'll wonder why the XStation isn't working, and it's because you need to go back and double check that you got all your pads. So at this point here, I am preparing the reset wire that's going to connect from the solder pad on the QSB to a spot on the left side of the board that is detailed in the XStation installation manual. So I'm just trying to get it to be as short of a wire as possible, just so it's a clean installation and has minimal chance of hooking onto anything or getting caught later in the installation. You know, that's always good practice when you're adding wires on top of a board. So now we're almost to the point where we're going to put the board back in the metal shielding, but before we do, you'll notice in the installation manual they tell you to clip off a little plastic piece from the bottom of the case shell right there that I'm pointing at, and this is to prevent it from putting any unnecessary pressure on the flex cable that's going to be bending around the edge of the board. This little support pad doesn't provide any useful purpose and can be removed without any issues, even if you restore your console back to stock for whatever reason. So don't be concerned about clipping it off. I just use some big wire cutters here to clip it off, but if you have some, surface snips or whatever, that would be great. Or you could even just use an X-Acto knife, So now we're connecting that flex cable. You want to make sure that the blue side is pointed towards you when you're doing this, and you want to get it fitting in there about halfway in. Half of the blue will be inside there, and then you want to make sure you get the latch closed on both sides, and then you're going to fold it over to your right so that it can be bent along the side of the board. And you don't want to crease it or like push hard on the fold. You just want to use a little bit of pressure to kind of reinforce the fold into the memory of the cable, so it doesn't come unfolded, but you don't want to crease it so hard that the cable actually rips inside, because these flex cables are very fragile. And then when you fold the metal shielding back in there, you want to make sure that you put the parallel port screws in first, like I'm doing here. And then you want to make sure that the flex cable from the QSB comes through the hole in the shielding. Now is the part where we're going to actually attach the XStation logic board, so that goes on the other side of the flex cable, blue side up again. And the flex cable is going to be making two kind of strange folds here at the end to let the XStation sit the way that they want it to sit on the drive pegs. So just kind of let the cable do what it wants to do. Again, don't crease it too hard, just give it a little bit of pressure to kind of get the cable to stay that way. And it's going to sit on those pegs. And the XStation comes with these little plastic legs that you can install, but I chose not to install those legs because I'm actually going to put a drive extension from Laser Bear Industries in here, and you don't want to use the plastic pegs when you do that because there's not enough vertical clearance. So now we're going to put the memory card and controller port thing back in. You just slip that flex cable back in. There's no latch or anything. And I'm just going to let it rest there for now, and I'm going to put the shield on top of it too, just because I want to test this thing. But I don't ever test PlayStations anymore without the top case on, just because it's a little bit dangerous and there's a risk of shorting out the power supply, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the video.
Alright, so I have it plugged in, and then really quick before we test it, I just wanted to show you that power supply I had that blew up. You can see this fuse is still intact, so it totally is worthless, didn't do its job at all, because if you look at the back, the short was literally so strong, it was AC voltage, it literally blew the trace off the fucking board. Like, that was the fuse, was the trace to the fuse blowing off, like burning off completely. It's like it's singed. It's just absolute insanity. So yeah, you got to be very careful with these power supplies. Anyways, let's go ahead and get the camera on a tripod, and then we'll turn this on. All right. So we're gonna turn on the the PlayStation. And it works. Let's go ahead and press triangle there to refresh the game list. I only put one game on there right now. Let me change the camera settings so that it stops autofocusing. There we go. So I just put one game on here just to test it out. This is a pretty slow memory card that I put in here, so that's why it was so slow to load the game. Cool, so FMVs are working. No issues. Sweet. Yeah, so this is what happens when you don't get a fast enough memory card in, is you get really slow load times. But this is just a tester memory card. This isn't the customer's memory card, and it's not the one that I would use personally. It's just one I had laying around. It's not that slow. It's basically like if you had a weak disk drive. But yeah, you can definitely get better performance in this with a quality SanDisk SD card.
3, 2, 1, go!
Whoop, analog doesn't work in this game. Alright, well, this console works great. The last thing I'm gonna do to it is actually install a insert here, a 3D printed insert, which I don't have yet. It's still in the mail, but I can show you guys one that I've already done here so you can see what it looks like. So here is my personal XStation console, and I'll just show you really quick. This is the insert I was talking about. It's made by, it's just a 3D print, but I ordered it from a website called Laser Bear Industries, and it has two benefits. Number one, it looks really nice, but number two is it actually gives you a full-size SD card slot, which is a lot easier to work with than the tiny little micro SD card that's inside here. It's a lot less likely that you're going to drop it inside the, and then the fact that this is enclosed means you can't drop the memory card inside the console by accident. Whereas if you look at this one that's not finished inside, it's literally, that's your memory card tray right there, and you have to reach in here and try not to drop the SD card anywhere, inside the console and have it fall in there. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth doing for sure. And it's definitely a nice touch to make the console look more finished. It comes in different colors too, like you can get gray or whatever. I just got black because the original drive tray is black.
Alright, so that concludes the installation of the XStation mod chip. if you guys want your PlayStation modded by me, you can always check out my website. It'll be linked in the description. And if you contact me, I can give you my current rate. As well as the address to send the console. My CRT repairs are local only, but I don't mind doing console mods by mail just because it's pretty easy to ship a console, and then you can just have the XStation mod chip and anything else just shipped directly to me from the suppliers. So it's pretty easy to facilitate that. So yeah, just get in touch with me and we can work it out. Thanks, guys. Bye.